Even after Dettelbach's resignation, the ATF continues to ramp up its war on gun owners, and they're not targeting criminals. They're coming after law-abiding folks like you and me. Forced reset triggers, stabilizing braces, and binary triggers were all perfectly legal, until the ATF decided they weren't. But what if your legally owned firearm is already on their radar, and you just don't know it yet? In this video, we'll break down which guns and accessories the ATF is cracking down on, how they're shifting definitions to turn everyday owners into felons, and what you need to know to stay ahead of their ever-changing rules. From door-to-door confiscations to backdoor bans, this is a fight for control, and you need to know where you stand before they knock on your door. The ATF has turned its gaze toward AR-15s that use forced reset triggers. If you know someone who owns a rare breed FRT-15 or a wide-open trigger installed, then there's a bullseye on their back. These triggers were designed to boost a rifle's rate of fire without stepping outside federal definitions of a semi-automatic. They still require a separate pull for each shot, but that hasn't stopped the ATF from calling them illegal machine guns. An FRT forces the trigger to reset after each round, yet it doesn't magically produce multiple shots from one pull. That's supposed to keep it on the legal side of the line. The agency, however, insists that FRTs allow multiple shots per pull, which conflicts with the NFA. It's another example of the ATF twisting regulations to chip away at our rights. They've been raiding manufacturers, sending cease and desist letters, and knocking on doors because these triggers symbolize the idea that American gun owners won't be easily controlled. In July 2024, Judge Reed O'Connor rebuked the ATF, saying it had gone beyond its authority. That decision followed the Supreme Court ruling in Garland v. Cargill, which overturned the bump stock ban and exposed the agency's habit of rewriting definitions. Even so, the ATF seldom concedes defeat. You can expect appeals, new tactics, and fresh attempts to label these triggers as contraband. If you have an FRT on your rifle, don't assume the threat has passed. Any gun with this trigger installed is still in their crosshairs. Most people who pick up a stabilizing brace do so thinking it would help them manage recoil and improve accuracy on their AR or AK pistol. For a while, the ATF agreed these braces were perfectly fine, even issuing letters confirming they didn't turn pistols into short-barreled rifles. Then, in early 2023, the agency flipped everything on its head. Suddenly, many braced firearms were declared SBRs subject to NFA rules. People were expected to register, dismantle, or hand them over, or risk being charged as a felon. They offered a narrow window to register without paying a tax, but that process required giving the government your personal information, fingerprints, and a promise of eternal compliance. We've seen the ATF change its mind before, so it's understandable that we feel uneasy about trusting these geniuses to not do it again. As soon as they labeled braced pistols as SBRs, agents started showing up with demands and veiled threats. Some gun owners had no clue they were suddenly in possession of what the ATF called contraband. Legal challenges popped up almost immediately. A few courts sided with gun owners, slamming the agency's overreach, yet the ATF kept enforcing its new rule as if nothing had happened. By shifting the legal definition overnight, they turned millions of folks into potential criminals. If you own a braced pistol, you're on their watch list. The ATF thrives on blurring definitions and keeping you uncertain about what's legal and what isn't, and that's not likely to change. If you've spent much time on the range or in gun circles, you've probably run across binary triggers such as the Franklin Armory BFS-3 or the Fostech Echo 2. They're popular because they let your firearm discharge one round when you pull the trigger and another when you release it. That significantly boosts your rate of fire without turning your rifle into a full auto, at least according to the usual definitions. The ATF is already hinting that these triggers could be next on the chopping block. People who love rapid fire have embraced binary triggers as an alternative that stays legal. The problem is, the ATF has a history of altering its stance whenever it suits them. It went after bump stocks, then forced reset triggers, and you can bet binary triggers will end up in the same spotlight. All it takes is one memo or an administrative rule change, and something you bought lawfully might be declared an illegal machine gun. For the moment, binary triggers remain legal, but that could change without warning. The agency doesn't hesitate to rebrand a lawful accessory if it wants more control. If you have a binary trigger installed, Be aware that the ATF has you on its list of potential targets. Each time they tweak regulations, it's another opportunity to catch people off guard and threaten them with criminal charges. Homemade firearms, labeled ghost guns by politicians and the ATF, have been vilified because they aren't easily tracked or regulated. Heard of polymer 80 kits or 80% lowers? They let you finish the final steps of manufacturing at home. That practice has been legal in the United States since before it was even a country. Yet the ATF is determined to clamp down on these builds, claiming they're fueling crime, despite the fact that criminals generally obtain their weapons by theft or illegal purchases. Polymer 80 and 80% arms. Once sold kits openly, with the clear understanding that an unfinished frame or receiver doesn't count as a firearm until you complete it. Then, in 2022, the ATF changed the rules by declaring these unfinished parts should be treated as firearms. That forced serialization, background checks, and the involvement of FFLs for something that used to be perfectly lawful. Naturally, this blindsided a lot of folks who believed they were following the rules. The true issue for the ATF isn't public safety. It's about registration and control. They don't like guns that are tough to track. Companies like Polymer 80 have been raided, and the ATF has shown up at people's doors, pressuring them to hand over items they built for personal use. If you have a so-called ghost gun, the agency sees you as someone who slipped through their net. Every new rule aims to push you into compliance or force you to destroy what you have. Bump stocks once offered a fun way to accelerate your semi-automatic fire using recoil. The ATF even said they were legal for years. That changed after the 2018 Las Vegas tragedy when politicians looked for something to blame. The agency did a complete turnaround and decided that bump stocks amounted to machine guns under the NFA, ignoring its own earlier rulings. Suddenly, owning a bump stock became a federal offense unless you handed it over or destroyed it. No congressional vote was involved. It was done by administrative fiat. Many gun owners refused to give in and challenged the ATF in court, ultimately leading to the 2024 Supreme Court ruling in Garland v. Cargill, which declared the bump stock ban unconstitutional. The justices recognized that these devices don't actually turn your firearm into a full auto. Don't assume the matter is settled. The ATF has a history of sidestepping court decisions. They might try a new angle or find another way to clamp down on similar accessories. If you ever had a bump stock, it's wise to stay vigilant because the agency won't let this go easily. SBRs and SBSs have been prime targets for the ATF since the 1934 NFA first grouped them with machine guns and silencers. That means owning one legally requires you to register it, wait for approval, and pay the government a tax just to have a shorter barrel. The official story is that these firearms can be concealed too easily, but criminals don't care about regulations in the first place. If you value the maneuverability or home defense advantages of a short barrel, the ATF wants to keep close watch on you. Things escalated after the agency decided to reclassify braced pistols as SBRs. Millions of law-abiding gun owners suddenly found themselves under threat because they owned something the ATF called legal yesterday and illegal today. Agents then went out in search of anyone who hadn't rushed to register. The shorter barrel itself isn't more dangerous than a longer one, but the ATF uses rules like this to wield power. Owning an unregistered SBR or SBS can bring you a world of trouble, and they know it. They'll take your information, claim you violated federal law, and threaten severe penalties. That atmosphere of uncertainty is exactly what they rely on to keep you guessing and to maintain the upper hand. People who own a machine gun made after 1986, or you've got a drop-in autosear, lightning link, or any other device that can convert a semi-auto into full auto, are all in the ATF's highest risk category. The Hughes Amendment banned civilian ownership of newly made machine guns, so only pre-1986 firearms are technically allowed. Those come with steep price tags and mounds of paperwork. Even if you have one that's properly registered, the ATF might still come knocking to make sure everything is in order. Tiny accessories that make a gun go full auto are prime targets for raids and sting operations. Agents scour gun shop logs, internet sales, and social media for signs of these items. Owning even a single unregistered conversion part brings felony charges because the ATF treats it like you're holding a full-blown machine gun. This isn't about reducing crime. It's about limiting civilian firepower so the government maintains the upper hand. Owning a lawful, registered full-auto weapon doesn't guarantee you peace of mind. The agency loves to move the goalposts whenever it sees fit. One day you might be in compliance, and the next day they're calling you a criminal for having the same item. If you've got a post-1986 machine gun or a conversion device, the ATF considers you a top priority. The ATF keeps special tabs on people who own a firearm with a bore larger than .50 caliber, a grenade launcher, or any weapon that's labeled a destructive device. These have to be registered under the NFA, and the hoops individuals jump through can be even more complicated than with an SBR. The government worries about civilians owning what it deems military-grade hardware, so they monitor every step: manufacturing, transfers, and even your personal usage. In the past, shotguns like the USA's 12 and Street Sweeper were sold as regular firearms until the ATF decided they were destructive devices. Their reasoning? They supposedly had no sporting purpose. Owners suddenly had to register them, pay a tax, and hope the paperwork went through, or else they risked becoming felons. The agency's definitions are elastic, changing anytime it suits them, which puts you in the dark about whether your large caliber gun will be next on the list. Even if we follow the rules and keep all the proper documentation, we can't expect to be off their radar. The ATF tracks every sale and may demand an inspection at any time. Once someone owns a destructive device, their name is stored in a federal database, and that's exactly where the agency wants all of us. Easy to watch and easier to penalize if we make the slightest misstep. You're seeing how the ATF is chipping away at your gun rights through constantly shifting rules, raids, and threats. One day your firearm is legal, and the next it's contraband. Don't take any of these warnings lightly. Keep up with legal developments and double-check that you're not suddenly in possession of something they've decided to ban this week. Talk to a lawyer if you're unsure, and stay connected with trustworthy sources in the firearm community who monitor changes in court cases. The ATF has shown it will twist definitions and impose new rules whenever it can, so vigilance is your best defense. And that's it for this video. The ATF has a long history of shifting definitions, bending laws, and turning legal gun owners into criminals overnight. From forced reset triggers and binary triggers to ghost guns and short-barreled firearms, their goal isn't safety, it's control. And if you own anything on their hit list, you can bet they're watching. Do you own any of the firearms or accessories we talked about in this video? Let us know in the comments. And while you're at it, hit that like button, share this video, subscribe, and click the bell icon so you don't miss any updates. Because trust me, this fight isn't over.